On this episode, we'll be looking at brands within key industries that have a heavy focus on physical presence, such as sports, hospitality, travel, and entertainment. And we'll be talking about how they are adapting to the continuing concerns over the coronavirus pandemic and the impact of social distancing rules, as well as looking at how their industry leaders are set to future-proof their business in a post-COVID world. My name is Russell Goldsmith, and we've got a real international flavour for this episode. Joining me online, first from Washington, DC, we have Aliya Khan, Vice President of Global Design Strategies at Marriott International. Next up is George Gottl, Chief Creative Officer at UXUS, who is based in Amsterdam. And then finally, here in the UK, is Sanjay Patel, Managing Director of The 100 at the English and Wales Cricket Board. Now, during this podcast, we'll also be hearing from James Ralley, the Head of Marketing and Commercial at the All England Lawn Tennis Club. And of course, that includes the Wimbledon Tennis Championships as well. We'll also hear from Charlotte Williams, VP for Content at Cannes Lions Festivals. And finally, John Timms of MLS Contract, whose company owns the franchise to the Sheffield Sharks basketball team here in the UK. So we thought all three of their recent experiences could really add to this debate. So lots to get through. I thought maybe we could start by just very quickly going around our virtual table and getting each of you to share the biggest impact that the COVID-19 pandemic has had on your businesses, which might help set the scene for the wider discussion. George, perhaps in your case, you can talk about the impact on some of the clients you work with at UXUS as well. So Aliya, let's come to you first.
Working for a hotel company, I think the biggest thing for us has just been getting guests to a point where they feel comfortable coming out again, coming and staying. With this sort of literal unknown and the lack of transparency, it's very easy to want to barricade yourself at home and not, be around other people or travel. And so for us, it was all about, how do you kind of mitigate some of that? Because it's a very real concern, where do you go? You go to the place that you'll be safe, and anything outside of that bubble becomes questionable. So, it's been hard for our business, but, it's a collective industry and everybody is kind of banded together, and we're starting to see the needle move slowly. So we'll get there. It's a long road ahead, but we will get there.
That's interesting, actually. Before I come to the other two here, are you seeing a lot of collaboration then with you and other hotel chains?
Yes. And, I think at a sort of when this all started, certainly at a very high level with the senior executives, but secondarily, subject matter specialists, all of us designers are talking to each other. What are you doing? What's working? How is this going? We're learning from each other. I was recently traveling and I ended up staying with a competitor, and it was interesting to see how they handle their cleaning protocols. So I think at the end of it, everyone acknowledges that there's no unique sort of solution for some of this. It's how do you make the mass of the world feel comfortable traveling, and whether they stay with us or someone else, secondary conversation. Right now it's let's get people feeling good about what's out there. So of course you learn from each other.
Sure. Sanjay, how about yourself?
Yeah, so we were all set to launch the 100 in July. Ironically, actually, tonight was the opening night of the 100, which is a new cricket tournament in England and Wales. 8 new teams, men and women, and we effectively, when it went to lockdown the 23rd of March, we had a look at what our options were. We examined all options from hosting a tournament behind closed doors to hosting a shorter length tournament, and actually we were left with pretty much only one decision, which was to unfortunately postpone the 100 to 2021. So I guess the biggest impact for us is we were no longer running that tournament this year. So quite a huge impact, big impact financially for us in terms of the revenue, clearly that we will not get in from our broadcast, the sponsorships, our match day ticketing revenue, and so on. So for us, it's pretty big impact and something that we're hoping to get into 2021, and fingers crossed we get some crowds back in stadia.
Yeah, indeed. George, how about yourself from sort of like the clients that you're working with at the moment?
Yeah, well, I think COVID obviously has accelerated a lot of trends that were already beginning to happen prior to the pandemic. The digitization of consumers in general is something that has had a huge impact, especially the clients that we deal with, and our particular discipline is working in the physical world. So, for example, one of our clients is McDonald's, and what Aliya said about safety and feeling secure in environments it's incredibly critical, especially in the restaurant world. So I think COVID has accelerated this idea of contactless physical retail kind of experiences. The beauty world, another category that we work in a lot, is also highly affected by this. Again, the safety aspect of sampling products. How do you sample cosmetics in a world where you have an infection rate? I think we can talk a little bit about what some of the specific clients have done later, but certainly this idea of contactless, more digital types of experiences. It doesn't mitigate the need for physical spaces, because I think consumers still love to shop, and they as a pastime, it's something that's not going to go away. But how they shop in the future, I think, is definitely going to be transformed.
Sure. Aliya, lockdown rules are slowly being relaxed as we record this, although I appreciate there's obviously concerns of a second peak in some places. But as people do start to travel again, and companies are looking at putting on conferences and seminars, which of course is a large part of your business, what do the first phases of post-lockdown look like for Marriott?
I think, I say this jokingly, but not. I'm so tired of seeing places that look like crime scenes, the yellow and black tape. And I feel that as a ingenious community of inventors and designers and thoughtful people, I think there's smarter ways to do that, right? So now that we're in this world of how do we get people to move through, be healthy, be safe, but feel welcomed, there's nothing more sort of frustrating or disappointing than seeing, the black and yellow tape and thinking, oh, well, they don't want me here. So it's how do you take the core of hospitality, make people feel welcome? Step one. How do you ensure their safety? Step two. And then step three, and I think this is where it's going to bring out the best in all designers, is the ingenuity. How do we get back to a world of meetings? We've been looking at a number of different things. The future of fitness. What is fitness going to be as we move through this? Are you going to go to a hotel gym anymore? What can we bring to you in your room? How does that work? Mini bars. Do you really want to be opening up a mini bar versus what if I brought you something that was curated to your specific needs? And I think the approach is the same with meetings. How do you allow people ways to gather, brainstorm, engage, connect, look at each other in the eye, but do it in a way that perhaps is less than conventional? I went to a meeting, literally my first business meeting 2 days ago, and it was interesting. Look, little tables of two scattered throughout the ballroom. There was plenty of distance, 2 people to a table. But there was something incredible about being able to look out at a room and look at the gentleman in the corner as he was presenting and look at him in the eye. And it reminds you that where Zoom is incredible, there's something about the face-to-face and being able to engage on that level that I think we as a community all have to focus on recapturing. And that's where I think the invention will come. That's the thought. How do we sort of get back into that world where people feel comfortable enough to do it, but do it in clever ways?
But a large part of that conference experience is the networking area outside, where you've got all the exhibition booths and also like the lunch buffet. I mean, how are you going to get around that? The issues around that.
I think you all probably remember Yo Sushi, right? And the conveyor belt. Like when you think about it, it's genius. Someone is putting food on a conveyor belt that you are touching and eating. You're not being served it. There's no menu. There's no nothing. At the end, you tally up your yellow, mauve, green plates, and that was your total. And I think that's the thinking we're sort of going after. What are the ways that you can be inventive, still deliver experience, do it well, be a little bit memorable, but also make people feel safe? Is it like the cool little bento box? Are they wrapped and packaged in specific ways? And then you kind of take that. I joke about them. Moe Chandon does the champagne vending machine. If I can't go up to a bartender, maybe that's not the worst thing in the world, taking my card and swiping and getting my little flute with my little thing. I think there are ways, and I think what I'm loving is the way people are adapting and changing and being accepting of these changes that in a way that I don't think we were before.
George and Sanjay, have you been back into the kind of meeting environment yet? And if you haven't, how are you feeling about, going to an event or a conference? George, how about, let's start with you.
No, not yet. We're still not allowed to meet in large groups. But, to Aliya's point about this idea of, feeling safe and being clever and innovative, I mean, we also have to remember that pandemics have happened in the past as well. So it's not like this is going to be a permanent state of terror continuously, but it will transform the landscape and it will transform behavior. And so I think that's where we're going to get the newness. And I think the innovation, that Aliya just described in terms of new ways of eating and new ways of behaving, I think is in a lot of ways, I think it's quite exciting and it offers a lot of opportunity. It's kind of like a recalibration of what the experiences have been in the past.
Sanjay?
Yes, no, so our office is still closed, so I haven't ventured that far away from my computer screen, unfortunately. But I love what Aliya is saying. I think because it's about reimagining what conferencing might look like and what the spaces are. And I think, if we had to go to a conference next week, would I be 100% comfortable? Probably not, because I think that's human nature. I don't think people are 100% comfortable going back to completely normal. However, once you do it once, and if that environment isn't intimidating, and if that environment, as Aliya said, doesn't have big red crosses and yellow stickers and so on, and is done in a way that makes people feel comfortable, and it's done in a way that's really relaxed, I think people will then get back to normal. And look, I think it's a huge opportunity, not for businesses actually to completely reimagine what they offer and their customer experience. And I think if you do that, when we do get back to normal, I'd imagine those businesses are going to be doing brilliantly because they would have already thought about how does this work for the customer and what is the benefits that I can bring to that experience. So no, I'm ventured out, but I look forward to come to one of Aliya's conferences. They sound good.
Well, what about, let's stick with you in terms of bringing crowds back to sporting venues. How is that going to work even, with social distancing, say down to 1 meter?
Yeah, so I think, the way that we're currently thinking about it is if that is our challenge next year, we don't see it happening this year. I think the best that we can hope for this year is potentially some pilots of maybe crowds in stadia, which will give us a really good blueprint to learn from. But if we're in this state next year, the way that we're going to approach it on the 100 is what is our unique take on it? Yeah, how do we use that to our advantage? So sport very much relies on at the moment is packed stadium, great atmosphere. That's what the TV cameras want. That's what the players want. However, if that's not possible, what is our version? Do we think about reconfiguring the stadia? Do we think about bringing more of a kind of cinema feel into a stadia? And I don't know the art of the possible, but these are things that I think as a new competition, which is designed for a family audience and designed to be entertaining, these are the sort of things that we actually need to think about. And if we do it in a way that signals what our brand is all about, I think long term we could be in a great place, because these are great opportunities to send strong messages about what your brand stands for. And that's certainly how we'll go about thinking about it next year. And if it's 1 meter, we're just going to have to make that work. But the number one thing for us is, look, public safety, that's got to be our number one. And then creativity, reimagining the experience, and making sure when people come, they're like, wow, I had a great time.
I love what you just said, because, you said cinematic, and automatically in my head, I thought back to like drive-in movies. We now live in a world where we're watching all of our content on iPads and televisions. But what about the art of an outdoor movie? We used to do it as kids. You sit with your family on a picnic blanket and you're together, but you're separate. And that aspect of nostalgia, I hope that creatives and people, as they start to solve through all of this, you know, forward-thinking technology is so valuable and important, but there's something about the nostalgic thread that often brings things home in an interesting way. And I think the fusion of the past and the present is a compelling way for us as a collective to address some of this.
Yeah, and sorry, just to build on that, if that's okay, that I think there's something around this COVID experience that has brought out that nostalgia, where people have been separated from their families for a period of time. People have been working at home with more time on their hands. Potentially, people are facing, sadness around them in terms of potential lives lost and so on. And I think what that does is it makes people think really hard about what's important to them. And I think that sense of nostalgia does come back. So again, just thinking about how do brands actually tap into that, I think is an interesting thought.
Sure.
We're going to hear in a second from, as I said, John Timms of the Sheffield Sharks. But Sanjay, what about if you can't fill the stadiums? What about the economics of that? For that's great for certain sporting, teams at the top end where they've got the sponsorship and the TV rights. But what about lower down the kind of the leagues and what's your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, look, I guess we sit here in a relative position of strength because we've got strong broadcast contracts and we've got strong sponsorship contracts, which allow us the investment levels to actually think about how you reimagine stadia. But I can imagine for lower leagues, that is going to be a real challenge, and they are heavily reliant on that match day income. And if we go into this year's football, rugby season, or any other sport, and there's 1 meter restrictions in place, let's say, for example, that is 40% of the stadia. I don't think the economics stack up, and I think at that point, I think some sports are going to face serious financial crisis, and that's something that A, the government's going to have to think through, and B, the sporting bodies that are in charge of those sports are really going to have to think through how do they get themselves through that period if their sport is reliant on match day income.
Yeah, well, that's perfect. Let's listen to what John Timms had to say. So, as I said, his company owns the Sheffield Sharks basketball team. So they are one of those teams that don't benefit from TV money. They only get around 1,000 to 1,200 fans buying tickets for the venue. I started by asking how he is going to restart for next season and be financially viable if they can't get 1,000 people into the venue to watch the team.
It's going to be an interesting challenge, not just for professional basketball clubs in the BBL, but like the Sharks, but for all sports out there that are looking at trying to re-establish their seasons and get supporters back in venues. It's one of the things that's a lifeline for most professional sports clubs and amateur clubs as well. So we're really looking into it. We're following all the advice. We're definitely monitoring what other countries are doing and looking for good practice, and would look to adopt elements of that. Our key thing is we're expecting lower attendance figures because of restrictions on venue capacity that might be put in place. So we're preparing for that. We're looking at platforms where our games can go on more on a pay-per-view platform. Currently they're available free to air. All games are available free to air, but that might move on to a pay-per-view platform to try and obviously maintain income streams coming into clubs, to be able to keep paying players and keep the club operational and moving forward.
So that's really interesting, John. And I mean, what's your expectation in terms of what you were getting in terms of attendance at the actual venue to the percentage you're expecting to maybe pay and watch online?
We're expecting people to be some reluctance to attend mass gatherings just generally in the world going forward. And that attending sports fixtures obviously would be one of those elements. So coming to a Sharks basketball game is going to be really important, that we build confidence and it's safe to come into venues and all those things. We are anticipating a drop. I couldn't tell you right now what I think that will be. A lot will depend on when the seasons restart, how much confidence is rebuilt. And also we might have to have restrictions on our own capacity. So arguably we might have 100% capacity filled because we've only got X number of seats available in the venue from a safety perspective. So there will be that. I think supporters will pay to watch their teams, but that'll all be about a financial and costing model that makes it worthwhile for everybody to do. So there's going to be more thought and process put into that. But at the moment, we obviously need to build on following up on the advice and working towards the numbers that we can get.
Sanjay, how do you maintain that emotional connection with an audience in the digital world, particularly in sport where fans have that kind of real tribal togetherness? So just as an example, I mean, I'm a big football fan. Sky and BT Sport have been adding the crowd noise to their coverage now that the Premier League is back, which has made the viewing a little more bearable than when the Bundesliga first came back, and the first game was so hard to watch. It just felt like a kind of pre-season friendly in an empty stadium. How are you going to what have you been doing now, and how are you going to maintain that connection?
Well, I think, as you said, I mean, the use of that crowd noise is something that we've actually been using on our cricket as well, which I think that helps the viewing experience. The other thing that we've been doing is looking at working with Sky on different camera angles. So generally, you see camera angles that always pans out onto the crowds and so on, and actually we've taken a lot of those camera angles out because that's actually not a great shot anymore. It's not a great picture. So we've kind of revised the way that we kind of look at, or Sky have revised the way they look at shooting the game. And then with the introduction of sound and so on, then that hopefully helps the viewing experience, and that translates all the way into the digital world in terms of how are we normally just do short format clips, and those are the things that we've just been thinking about. How do they look for the viewer so it looks as normal as it possibly can pre-COVID with people in stadia. And I think that's probably the only way that you can really try and keep that element of tribalism, because as we all know, sport is reliant on atmosphere, it's reliant on crowds, it's reliant on passion, and those are the things that you kind of don't get when you don't have people in stadia.
Aliya, how about? I mean, you touched on this earlier in terms of like trying to avoid the yellow and black tape and everything, but how about yourself? How are you going to kind of recreate that experience, that welcoming feeling when people walk in?
I think it's so Washington DC, interestingly, has reopened restaurants, and I gotta tell you, there's something amazing about the buzz of conversation. And even if your tables are 6 or 8 feet apart, just hearing the aura and the bubble around you is pretty amazing. And you don't know that you missed it till you have it again, and then you're like, oh, I really missed that. Sitting and eating dinner by myself at my dining table is infinitely less fun. But I think it's going to be about capitalizing on the energy piece. And Sanjay, as you were speaking, I love cricket, avid cricket watcher, and a lot of it is, even if you don't watch it in person, what we love when we watch cricket is we're all texting each other and messaging each other and teasing each other. And, when you're in compressed timeframes, like, a one-day match, or in the case of the 100, even better, right? Because it's even more compressed. I think we are going to have to learn from that and sort of find ways to compress the energy. So, when you do come into a place, even if you aren't right up against someone, can you do things with sound? Can you do things with proximity, with visuals? Can you layer people? We've been talking a lot about like screens. There are screens that say, ugh, don't come near me. And there are screens that really feel sort of designed and calibrated. So this is my VIP pocket and this is your VIP pocket. George and I, a few weeks ago, were talking about a restaurateur in Amsterdam who was testing this concept where, everybody sits in a glass box, and that's your glass box for the evening, and you have your meal, and they serve your dinner on a beautiful charcuterie board. But I think the point of all of that is, how do you sort of deliver individual experiences that are so individual that they really impact you in a sensory way close up, but you're also thriving off the adjacencies of other people. There was something, I want to say it was in New York City, it was in the New York Post last week, about how people were doing yoga in individual bubbles, but the bubbles were all together. So your individual space was your own, but you're still part of a tribe or a community. And I think whether it's sports or whether it's hospitality or meetings or, you know, frankly, even shopping, if you can be made to feel like you're part of a community, even if you physically, technically aren't, I think there's something to be said for that, you know?
Yeah, I think also to underline what Aliya just said about this aspect of sensory, right? So the idea of enhancing sensorial moments. And again, going back to what I love about living here in Amsterdam is that the Dutch are very innovative. They really take every opportunity to try something different. And there's a new concert, well, it's not a new concert hall, it's actually from the 1700s, an 18th century building that's been turned into an event venue. And there's a restaurant in the front, but the restaurant in the front of the building is quite small. So it doesn't allow for the distancing that needs to take place. And since they can't have these big events right now, they turned the main hall into a restaurant, and they set these tables up in the space with all the distancing that's required. And they serve this kind of predetermined 8-course gourmet Michelin star meal inside the space with the most unbelievable audiovisual presentation you can imagine. I mean, they give you literally a menu of each theme that the course is based around. And you sit down, and the first theme was Alice in Wonderland, and this whole magical world started taking place. And when the food arrived, it looked like candy, but it was all savory food. I mean, it was just a spectacular evening. And this is what, you know, I think this is what we've been talking about, is that right now, what the circumstances are creating is a tremendous amount of creativity and new ways of approaching experience. So here's this event hall that has this incredible audiovisual system stuck into it. It's a beautiful, you know, building from the 18th century, so it has all this gorgeous architecture. And instead of letting it go to waste, they transform it into this pop-up restaurant experience. It's only going to last till September, but it was really completely unforgettable. I mean, it was absolutely one of the most memorable meals I've had in a long time, both for the quality of the food, but also this immersive, very emotive, exciting experience. And you felt like connected to this whole room of people, at the same time feeling very safe.
And that's kind of genius also, because now that you know it's September, there's going to be a lot of people like me who are going to want to sort of try it, right? You're going to find a way in your head to be safe about all of it and get over maybe, you know, certain considerations you might have just to go and experience this. That's really clever. And again, there's something about compressed timelines and compressed energy that I think makes people a little bolder and a little bit braver to at least try something.
Well, I think what you just said, you know, I think people are at their most creative when they have the most constraints.
Absolutely.
And I think what's happening, and just like Aliya said, is like, this is not making, if you do it right, it doesn't diminish the experience. If you do it right, it actually elevates the experience. And ordinary people can feel very VIP because now all of a sudden they have this personal one-on-one attention. They have their own private space. They have things that normally you would have to pay a lot of money for. You know, this meal that I had with wine pairing, 8 courses, was $100 a person. I mean, it's like, it was ridiculously inexpensive for what you were getting, you know? And they were more than happy to do that because the restaurant was full of people, because everyone wanted to experience this special moment. And it would not have happened if it wasn't for COVID, you know?
This is a strange analogy, but I'll make it anyway. You know, if you think back in the history of civilization and cultures and architecture, there was this notion that existed in many parts of the world of a harem, you know? And by having a harem and having the partitions, the architectural partitions that were often beautifully detailed, marble, stone, wood, you name it, you were framing points of view. So what you're doing is you're not saying, hey, all of you please commingle and connect and socialize. We're going to put these deliberately designed interventions between you. It's not going to stop you from socializing. It's going to make you a little bit more clever about how you do it. the way you frame the points of view becomes super thoughtful, because you're really thinking about those little windows and what you're looking through and what you're seeing and what you're hearing and what you're smelling. So it's a very basic example, but I think if you can activate anticipation through design, through thoughtfulness, through, you walk into a kitchen and you smell the food before you see it, and suddenly you're hungry and your mouth is watering. I think there's some basic human instinct that we need to find or trigger to create that anticipation so people will want to go further.
That's really interesting. I mentioned earlier that I caught up with James Ralley regarding the Wimbledon Tennis Championships and Charlotte Williams about Cannes Lions. So I put this question to them as well about maintaining an emotional connection with the audience. So let's just have a quick listen to what they had to say. Let's start with James.
Without the championships running, it was obviously a huge challenge for us to ensure that we maintained a degree of relevance, and we felt that was really important for us to do rather than just doing nothing at all. The announcement was made on terms of cancellation in April, and collectively as a team, and also working with IBM, our partners across the digital world, really, we were sort of worked in a very agile way and created the concept of what we're calling Wimbledon Recreated and the Greatest Championships. And what that entails is we felt it was really important to try and engage with our fans and ask them to participate within a campaign. So we've seen a huge amount of people sort of creating their own films, lots of user-generated content around their memories of Wimbledon, both from just watching far away, but also actually attending as well. So we've seen a huge collection of those films coming through. In fact, we've been overwhelmed by the numbers that we've seen. And then just to support that across the fortnight itself, we created this concept of the Greatest Championships. And what we've done, so collectively our tennis boffins, if you like, have selected their favourite matches played on each day of the tournament. So our favourite matches from day one, day two, and we go through the tournament. And ultimately, we choose what we see as those greatest matches that have ever been played. And that's been live on Wimbledon.com. It's also been across all of our social media channels. And in many ways, we followed the Greatest Championships like it was a live event. So it's been a similar kind of operation, but obviously it's ultimately using our archive content. But what we like to think we've done is we've used that archive in a slightly more sort of creative way than just literally sort of sending it out. And I think what's made it equally as more powerful really is that we have great relationships with our key broadcasters. Obviously the BBC in the UK, ESPN in the US, beIN Sports around France and the Middle East, etc., etc. We actually took the concept to those guys as well, and you would have seen that certainly in the UK, the BBC has featured Wimbledon programming both in the day and at night, celebrating great matches that have been played in a similar way to how we've done that. So it's been a really sort of joined up approach, and we obviously haven't seen anywhere near the numbers that you would get during a typical Wimbledon fortnight, but considering there hasn't been a tournament, the engagement levels have been pretty good.
That's really interesting. And anything else specific for social media that you've launched?
Yeah, so we've also got a concept of the Wimbledon Wish, and actually this really falls out of what we were trying to do when the cancellation was made, is be very show real humility, because at the end of the day, whilst we were all incredibly sort of sad about having to cancel the championships, there were so many things happening in the world that were far more important, obviously. And we wanted to embrace that. We had lots of content that we created around the heroes from the NHS. Roger Federer voiced over a film that we did, and that went out pretty soon after the cancellation. And then we also created the Wimbledon Wish concept, where we asked people to send in their wishes of what Wimbledon could do for them as fans. And I think what that has helped us to do is perhaps break down some of the perceptions of Wimbledon being, effectively slightly elitist, maybe in the sports of tennis has suffered with that a little bit. So I think it tried to show that we're a lot more open, much more accessible, and the numbers of wishes that we've had come through have outstripped any other promotion something that I've ever been involved in, and a lot of ticket requests, as you could imagine, but also some pretty interesting stuff as well. And then what we've also done as well, which is another first, and we were planning on doing this even if the championships would have been running, was to the creation of a mobile game. It's got a retro feel, so it fits with the sort of the archive focus that we have with the greatest championships. You'd recognise the game. It was I think it was Arkanoid in the 90s. It turned into Alleyway, I think, in the 2000s, and it's a lovely retro feel. We put a Wimbledon theme to it. Very shareable. Not a great use of words in this current time. Very viral. And we've seen some, again, really, really strong numbers. And what we've been trying to do within that as well is trying to generate, sign up to our CRM tool, My Wimbledon. And sign-ups have been really, really good. And I think what we've been able to do with it this year is prove a concept. And I think it's certainly something that we'll be looking at for next year as well.
So before we hear from Charlotte on Cannes Lions, George, thoughts on what James had to say?
Yeah, I think James had something very interesting to say about creativity again. Going and looking at new ways of handling very traditional. In this case, a very aspirational event, right? I mean, Wimbledon's, in a way, is kind of like a luxury sport. It's a very elite, kind of high-level, highbrow moment in the world of sports. And I think that COVID is accelerating this accessibility aspect. So it's not only transforming behavior, but it's also transforming what consumers consider aspirational. I think the world of luxury in particular is being completely shaken up by what is happening in terms of, going back to what Sanjay, mentioned about kind of a recalibration of what's important in life, and looking at, what is it that you really want and what is it that's really aspirational. And I love that, James mentioned that, this Wimbledon Wish kind of, activation that they created is creating this more accessibility to people, and that Wimbledon isn't this far removed, difficult thing to attend. It can be part of everybody's lives, and I think that that's a really nice thing. And maybe when we talk about retail a little bit more, we can talk about this kind of transformation of aspiration and what it means going forward for brands.
Definitely. Okay. Well. Let's first of all hear, as I said, from Charlotte. So she's talking about the same issue, but in relation to the marketing event Cannes Lions.
So we are trying to be something a little bit different. We realise that people spend all their working day at the moment on Zoom calls, and what we wanted to do was create an event a virtual event that didn't look like a Zoom fest. So some of the stuff we've produced with our partners, our content collaborators, if you like, are really visually interesting short films and Netflix quality documentaries on creativity. Being Cannes Lions, we've obviously got the benefit, if you like, of working with some of the most creative companies in the world. So we've really put that to use. We didn't just want to have talking heads to camera. We wanted really visually beautiful films that people are going to, take time out to watch and engage with. And that's really paid off in the results that we've seen. We've seen really strong engagement, people viewing content, for a really high amount of time online, in an online environment, and people coming back to view more video every day because we're still publishing new videos every day.
Yeah, I'm not surprised, because I've had a look at some of the content, and it really is very well produced. But the question I was going to ask is, it's all free, and why did you make that decision to open up the content to anyone?
Yeah, so we made the decision quite quickly. I mean, obviously we've all lost track of time a bit, I think, during the quarantine, but we made the decision very quickly to pivot to a digital event. And what we felt is that it was a real opportunity for Cannes Lions to reach our global audience, and allow people to experience the festival when previously it can be quite cost prohibitive. I mean, it's very expensive to fly to Cannes and be put up in a hotel in Cannes. So what we wanted to do is use this opportunity to really engage like an audience who we perhaps might not engage with, a younger audience, a really global audience. We have people sign up from 140 countries from around the world, and that for us has been brilliant. Obviously, we've been able to capture their data, but we haven't charged them a penny. And I think it's showing them what the Lions brand is about, perhaps changing some perceptions as to what Cannes Lions is about, and also getting them to, to experience our products, really. So it's been very positive for us.
So George, and your thoughts on what Charlotte had to say there?
Yeah, I think again it comes back to accessibility. The Cannes Lion event is a very exclusive event again, and here, it's this kind of democratization of these aspirational events and moments, and I think COVID has really accelerated. That was a trend anyways that was happening within this kind of world, like we'll call it luxury. And now it's accelerated even further. And I think the wonderful thing is that it's opening up entirely new markets, maybe that they couldn't have normally have reached. And I think for these events, they're creating awareness among people who would normally not even be aware of what Cannes Lion is, or even Wimbledon for that matter. I mean, young people nowadays don't have those kinds of context anymore. So, I think that COVID has helped reach a much broader audience because of the digital platforms. And I think in turn, those events that would normally not reach those people have been able to expand their audience for the future.
Yeah, I think you've picked up on a really good link actually between those two clips. I want to change the subject very slightly. We've seen on the news, through things like the protest marches, and here in the UK, just a few weeks ago we had sudden hot weather and thousands of people headed down to the south coast, and we've now got the reopening of the pubs, and there was videos being shared from London and what chaos that looked like on certain streets. In certain cases, little concern for social distancing, public safety, huge environmental impact caused by the mess left behind on some of these places. The question I want to ask you, as the ones organising these events, if you're encouraging people to get together again after lots of time not being together, how much of that responsibility lies on your shoulders to ensure that everyone is behaving themselves and acting responsibly? Sanjay, let's start with you.
Look, I think all the responsibility lies on us, as certainly in my world as the event organizer. I think it's really, really important as well that whatever event it is, people follow those guidelines, because at the end of the day, we have to be seen as a responsible event, and the government need to be comfortable that we can put on these events, and we're not, and public safety still our number one outcome. So the responsibility lies with us. I think things that you can do to control is things like thinking about crowd flow and crowd movement, simple things around making sure that you've got enough stewards and you've got enough people to manage the event is really, really important. And then again, communication to people coming into the ground. So you can't expect people to turn up and then automatically know what to do. You've got to be communicating those things before they get to the ground, when they're in the ground, during they're in the ground, and then you've got to be help guide them through, right? And at the end of the day, that is in itself, it's quite a logistical operation that is required, but it'll be absolutely essential for sports coming back on.
Aliya?
I think it's also how you do it, right? We could stand here and be like, be safe, wear your mask, step aside, do all of this stuff. And I think there's something around tone of voice. I was reading one of our manuals yesterday, actually. So like the W Hotels food and beverage team have pulled together a series of guidelines. And, one little thing that kind of stayed with me, when you come to one of our places, once you sit down, they give you a little bag for you to put your mask into. So they're saying, please wear a mask as you go through the space. Once you sit down and you can take it off, let me give you this thing. I've thought about this for you so that you're not leaving your mask on the table and it's getting dirty. I'm offering you an opportunity for this. Or when I present you with the check, let me give you a Purell wipe. Let me just add that extra layer in. And, it's the thoughtfulness with which we do it. And thoughtfulness doesn't cost money. It's just thought. I went to dinner last night, and as I was entering the restaurant, and we were sitting on a courtyard, the maitre d', like, lovely, and he came up and he was like, "Thank you so much for wearing your mask till you sit down at the table. Not put your masks on and please don't take them off." It's a positive reinforcement. And, now more than ever, I think up until this point, I'm certainly guilty of this, between firing off emails and texts and WhatsApps and what have you, and just go, gotta get it done. You forget the art of the tone of voice and how you communicate things and how you request things, and how even when you have to have maybe less than comfortable conversations, you can navigate all of that with the choice of word that you use, or even body language, And I think that's going to be an interesting part of how we turn some of this corner, particularly in societies where unfortunately they still think that this is a hoax and they don't want to wear masks. Like, how do you use the power of persuasion, the art of language, body language, thoughtfulness, sequencing, all of these things to get people on the bus? That's going to be, I think, an interesting moment to navigate.
George, you were nodding along all the way through that.
I think what Aliya said is incredibly powerful. I mean, especially in the world of retail. There should be an invitation, not a demand, and it's a big difference. They say you can attract more flies with honey than with other things. So I think the what Aliya said about being kind and using psychology with positive reinforcement will help transform these events. I mean, Amsterdam had a huge BLM protest. 5,000 people showed up at the square. 5,000 people showed up at the square, all wearing masks, all standing apart. There was hardly any police. This sense of society also is extremely important, that you are a collective, that you are together, and that you're all in it together. And I think what was interesting about the protests here is that they did not become violent. They did not require a tremendous amount of police. Everyone protested. It was incredibly powerful. Everyone was heard, but everyone was very, I wouldn't say the word behaved, but they understood that they were a collective and that they didn't want the infection rate to skyrocket. So everyone showed up with their masks. Everyone did exactly what they were supposed to do. They made themselves known about, this horrible thing that's happening in terms of rights. And they all left, and it was a very positive experience overall. So, the psychology of all of this is incredibly important. And I love what what Aliya said is so true. Thank you for wearing your mask versus, you need to wear your mask the second you walk in, and be very demanding about it. Because then immediately it creates tension versus welcoming hospitality.
So it's so true. It's part of your brand, part of your experience, part of what you're offering. And actually, I think what we've seen up until now is the kind of fear factor. You must do this, otherwise you are in danger. Mm-hmm. And going back to right from the start where Aliya said all about the signage and so on, it's provoking fear, and actually that's just got to flip. And I think we'll see now events, brands, etc. are just going to have to think about how they message in a much more positive, open, friendly, encouraging way, rather than a way that strikes fear.
And the power of that to connect customers to brands. Yeah. I mean, what Aliya just said about, getting the little Purell wipe after you get your ticket. I love that. I mean, I would go back to the W because it feels like they care about me, mm-hmm. Versus just like, okay, well, here's your ticket. Make sure, do you have sanitizer? What, it's just like, it's very thoughtful, and it almost feels like they're, already taking into consideration the fears and the issues you have of a customer being there to begin with. And so it makes you feel even more comfortable.
George, are there any clients that you're working with at the moment, or any others that you've seen from other industries that you've been impressed with in terms of how they are focusing on brand transformation to adapt to this new environment?
Yeah, I mean, I think that there's a lot going on, and like I said earlier, I think COVID has accelerated a lot of the trends that we're already starting to see prior to the pandemic. I think, in particular, the world of beauty is very much on the pulse of consumer behavior. You know, um, and there's a couple of examples I think there that really are showing how this combination of, or this fluidity between the virtual and the IRL world, how easily they kind of flow together, and the brands that are navigating that are the ones that are really creating success for themselves. In particular, NYX, I don't know how many people out there are familiar with that brand. It's part of the L'Oreal group. They like to position themselves as a youthful MAC cosmetic brand. And they are looking at their brand as entertainment in terms of their position. So I thought that was a really fascinating way of looking at how do you create this kind of, community around a brand using things like Netflix, for example. So like NYX sponsored Sabrina Teenage Witch and used that program to create this whole world around their brand. And again, emphasizing the digital aspect versus the in-store aspect, and how that kind of translated over into the IRL experience. Another great example of that type of mentality are the brands that are digital natives. So I don't know how many of people out there are familiar with Patrick Starr, who's a social media beauty celebrity. He's just launched a new cosmetic brand called One Size that is really about complete inclusivity. So he's a gender fluid individual who transforms himself into this very beautiful person, neither male nor female. He has a huge following online, many, many millions of followers who look at his beauty tips and how to apply and become, a much more attractive individual. And he's launching his brand in Sephora. So he has this very high digital presence that can reach a very broad audience, a little bit like, the sports events and the other things that we've been talking about. But then you can also go into a physical space like Sephora and purchase it if you'd like. And again, Sephora also has a huge online community as well. So this kind of fluidity between the brick and mortar and the digital is a trend that was happening prior to COVID and now has been accelerated dramatically, in particular in the world of beauty. But, other brands just like McDonald's as well, also going to complete contactless payment, being able to order food through your mobile device before you go into the store and just picking it up there. Or having it obviously, home delivery, which is an obvious thing. But nevertheless, the world of kind of these digital communities, let's call them, that flow between real life and virtual life is becoming more prevalent. The gaming communities in particular are creating these entire events. I don't know if you know what Fortnite is. It's this huge I think billions of players at this point. And Travis Scott, who's a rapper, launched his album in Fortnite as an avatar. And he had 23 million people, quote unquote, attending his concert event on Fortnite. So I think those are the kinds of things that we're going to be seeing more in the future. I mean, maybe even potentially sports games will be played in these kinds of virtual realms. But then at the same time, we're also linking back to the physical world. So that kind of fluidity, I think, is the trend for the future, that indefinable, because everyone, talks about omni-channel, but it's not really omni-channel at all anymore. It's about consumer channel. And the digital natives in particular are incredibly fluid between virtual and real life. And they move between the two as if they're the same thing. And I think that is the biggest difference now post-COVID, is that there's more people who are accustomed now to dealing with that kind of fluidity between those two worlds.
Excellent. Okay, the last area I want to focus on is the plans that you're all putting in place to future-proof your businesses. Now, I'm going to give you a second to think about it, because before I ask for your thoughts, here's what Charlotte and James had to say about their plans for 2021's Cannes Lions and Wimbledon, respectively.
Well, we've learned a lot this year. We talk to our customers all the time about, what the festival and the shape of the festival should be. We work very closely with our community. In terms of what the festival will look like next year, I think obviously there are still question marks around the shape of the festival and what the laws will be and what the recommendations will be for next year. But we'll work closely with the authorities and with the French authorities, and of course anyone else we need to listen to ensure a safe festival. I think you can expect the usual sort of stages for Cannes Lions. I mean, whether that means we have to take people out of the theatres and move them back in to adhere to any sort of health and safety regulations, we'll do that, but you can still expect the same magic that you would always get from the festival. The same high profile speakers and creative agencies from all around the world. We'll still be bringing those together.
So, I mean, as you can imagine, there's a huge amount of planning now. We have to, without wanting to sound flippant, we are hoping for the best, but planning for the worst. We're having to be very, very agile, because this is changing literally all of the time. But there'll be scenarios put in place around, what does a Wimbledon look like with reduced capacities? Looking at, we've looked at 2 meters, now we're obviously looking at 1 meter as well. What kind of impact that's going to have on capacity? But we're if the worst comes to worst, what does it behind closed doors? These are all things that we're having to plan for and look at, because if we didn't, we'd be ultimately being pretty irresponsible. But of course, as I say, we are hoping for the best, and we hope to be able to deliver a Wimbledon as close to the one that we all know and love.
Sanjay, your plans for the coming year?
Well, we've already started future-proofing, so we've managed to get Cricked back on. And it's in a behind closed doors, a complete biosecure environment. So, that from all the way in terms of making sure that you've got all your players, all your staff, everything completely quarantined for a period of time, and then playing the game, and then testing and all those things. So we're well on our way to making sure that we can survive post-COVID. If restrictions aren't lifted, but we are anticipating that restrictions will be lifted, and then it's also about thinking about how do we get fans back in stadia in ways that we spoke about earlier, and then hopefully at some stage get back to the normal. But we again, there's not going to be a normal for us, because hopefully we're going to think about how we've reimagined, recreated, and thinking about our customer experience. So when people come back to cricket and when people attend the 100 for the first time, it's something that they will thoroughly enjoy.
Do you think it's almost a chance for sport to have a bit of a reset?
I think sports will reset, because the inevitable impact of COVID is going to be a significant loss of revenue. And when you have a significant loss of revenue, you have to rethink your business model, and you have to rethink your cost base. And again, there'll be sports will do that in different ways. I think the simple way to do that is simply cut costs and go to the lowest common denominator. But actually, what you probably need to do is do both cut costs, but also then think about how you genuinely get creative. Think about innovation in your sport. Think about new ways to make money. And I think the sports that will come out of this crisis in a better way are the sports that will take those kind of proactive approaches and not simply just go down the cost-cutting exercise.
Aliya, for your industry and Marriott?
Do you all remember the time before you could travel when you didn't have to take your shoes off, when you didn't have X amount of liquids? I think the thing that we as a collective have to remember is human beings adapt much faster than we give them credit for. You know, you put a few rules into place, you create a tempo, you create a pattern, you go into any airport in the world now and you'll see people taking off their shoes, pulling out their laptops, and it's happening pretty seamlessly. So when you think about that, I think, you know, as a collective, we obviously have to continue to find ways to make people feel safe. But I think this is our opportunity to also try new things, you know. What are those things that we're going to do in guest rooms that maybe we didn't need before? Or what are those, you know, approaches or tactics? You know, maybe it's less about clutter, less objects in a room. Maybe it's cleaner, brighter, more timeless surfaces. It's, you know, how we work in public areas, how we get a coffee or a cocktail. I think we as a collective have a little bit of work to do right now up ahead. But I have faith that if you find ways to build memory and stimulate the senses, I think we'll be able to get everyone along for the ride as long as they feel safe.
Excellent. George, final thoughts on this from you?
I completely agree with, you know, especially what Aliya just said now about adaptability. I think what we're looking at is COVID has been an impetus. It's been the trigger that has created or accelerated these new behaviors. A lot of the behaviors that we're seeing are being enforced by this pandemic because of this kind of issue of infection. But once that's gone, and it will be gone because we've had pandemics in the past before and they do eventually go away or they transform into something less toxic, we're going to end up with a bunch of people who are completely used to doing things in a different way, much more digitally savvy in terms of a larger population base, using experiences that they've never used before, like, you know, the different type of digital worlds that are being created around these brands and these different types of experiences. And it's going to definitely leave a mark in terms of pushing the world closer towards what the future vision would have been, you know, and you know, unfortunately, there's a lot of businesses that are suffering hugely financially. Some of them maybe were around a little bit longer than they needed to be. And I think COVID has accelerated that kind of transformation of the landscape. It's painful, transformations always are, but I think in the end we're going to come out hopefully with a much more positive world. People who are much more democracy in terms of the sense of accessibility to things that used to be quite elite, now more accessible and easy to get to. Yeah, I mean, I what the you know, Sanjay and Aliya have said, I completely wholeheartedly agree. But we also can't forget this is not going to be around forever. That what it is, it's creating and initiating a lot of change more quickly than we had anticipated.
Mm-hmm.
Fantastic. That wraps up this episode. Thanks once again to all three of you for joining me online today. And thanks also to James, Ralley, Charlotte Williams and John Timms for their contributions as well. We hope you've got a lot out of this episode. We'd love to hear any comments you may have on the issues we've covered today.